Yeah, this was, I think, a relatively recent movie that was made. I remembered it wrong. It's One Night with the King, with lush cinematography, a mesmerizing score, and an all-star cast including Peter O'Toole, Omar Sharif, and John Rhys Davies. One Night with the King is a sweeping epic about Hadassah, the young Jewish orphan who becomes the biblical queen Esther, the queen of Persia. And then it tells a little bit, she grows up to become a beauty who catches the eye of powerful King Xerxes and ultimately becomes his bride. But despite her position, her life is in danger as the state decreed that all Jews will be put to death. Defying warnings to remain silent, however, she struggles to save her people, even as she attempts to hide her heritage in this exciting and inspiring story about courage, faith, and destiny. So maybe sometime we'll just have to get together some evening and have a movie night and watch it. And after having read the book, maybe we can compare and see how faithful. The book is maybe, I think, lends itself a little more to storytelling by cinematographers, because there aren't a lot of details and there's not a lot of overtly doctrinal type stuff that you run across. It's kind of a general story, and we can see God's hand in the background. But yeah, maybe we'll have to pick a night sometime, and if you're interested, I'll hook up the projector and we'll just watch the movie. I watched this one other time because someone asked me to. They said, "Would you watch it and give us your thoughts on it?" But it's been long enough ago, I don't really remember all that well. So tonight, the second half of Esther. I think you all made it, right? Was this everybody we had last week?
No, Patrick didn't come.
Bob is back from Hawaii, and he's broke his bone right here. So he's in a cast, and he's like this.
Oh, golly.
So they just put the cast on today. So he drove home left-handed. He says, "I don't think I should be driving with my eyes."
With one hand.
He's Hawaii, right? You broke me over there?
Yeah, jogging, yeah.
Yeah, and he wouldn't go.
It was a rough time on Sunday morning.
Yeah, we'll have to walk up, slap him on the arm.
Yeah.
I did send Brenda a text this morning just to see how she was getting along, and she said the pain has subsided a little bit, but life with one arm isn't fun, she said.
It's kind of like being without power.
Yeah, I guess so. And I think she goes back to the doctor next week. I want to say Tuesday. I could be wrong, but it's something like that. Sometime next week.
Shane Baker's usually been taking her, so.
Oh, okay. Well, last week we had, I think for the most part, gotten through chapter 4, good soap opera type fashion. We kind of end there with a cliffhanger. Mordecai has told has told Esther that she should go try to talk to the king to head off the plan that Haman had hatched to wipe out, to destroy the Jews. And it's one of the little details in the story that by casting lot, or what in the ancient language would have been pur, that Haman had selected a date to carry this out sometime well into the future. And it kind of made possible the story as it's going to unfold in the coming chapters. And that occurrence, that happening by chance, kind of brings up a question that lingers in the background of the story of Esther. And that is it all a matter of fate? Or is all of this a matter of luck? Or is this the hand of God? Some would answer, oh, it's fate, or oh, it's just luck, it's blind chance, it's just But I think the book of Esther, among other things, invites the questions for us Christians is, or do we do well to see the hand of God at work? I've been watching, not a lot, but a little bit I think it's on the History Channel over the weekend. They had a lot of stuff about Washington and Lincoln. And then they had some stuff on the World Wars. And as I sat there and listened, they talked about how all the fortuitous things that happened, right? That's fancy word for luck. And how General Grant took charge and he was where he was at just the right time so that he could win a decisive battle after a string of defeats. And then Lincoln had to make some difficult choices, and he wasn't getting necessarily, there was no consensus on kind of the way to do things. And so he made some decisions about generals and about strategy. And as fate would have it, fate smiled on him, and it luckily turned out the way that it did. And I got to tell you, I sat there thinking, are we the greatest nation in the world, and that is why we conquered everybody? Or perhaps was God at work, and maybe we're not half as great as we sometimes tend to think that we are, and should we perhaps be a little wary lest in our arrogance we lose sight of this fact? And it's kind of a new way to look at things.
Yeah, that's the History Channel, that Lincoln one's really good,
Yeah.
but it's, there'll be no missing at it, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, they don't. They don't.
The interview that most of the people are,
Yeah, they really try hard to do those things with no mention of God. They're not going to give any credit to God.
Barack Obama gets to talk a few times. They go to real life people, but most of the liberals, there's no conservatives get to talk.
Yeah.
But Obama talks about Dred Scott and blacks.
And some of the, when you look at things and how things string together, I think oftentimes military victories are not half as definitive as history ultimately makes them out to be. A battle or two go a little differently. I thought of that the other night when I was watching Midway. That new picture, Midway. There came a point in Midway where they kind of had decided we're going to look here or we're going to look there. They couldn't look both. And they decided to look here. And lo and behold, they found the Japanese fleet. Had they gone this way, boy, that whole chapter could have been much, much different. Was it fate? Was it luck? Or do we allow that perhaps God had a hand in it?
That was a good movie too. The remake is better than the original.
I thought so too. I used to like the old one, but the new one they did pretty good. Anyway, so let's get back to Esther. Esther is thinking about going in to see the king, but it is kind of a risky thing. And Esther understands this. And so right at the end of chapter 4, I think it's verse 16, Esther asks that, have all the Jews fast for me, which would have been an ancient preparation for prayer. Fasting and then prayer would have gone very much hand in hand to an ancient Jew. So, don't eat, don't drink 3 days, right? So pray. It's like pray, 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 and then I will go in to see the king. And if I perish, I perish. Right? So, we're not told. What does she think her chances are? Is she not confident? Or is she saying this with great confidence? We don't know. The story just doesn't tell us. It just tells us that this is getting ready to happen. So we pick things up in chapter 5, and I think if we could read the first 8 verses of the first half of chapter 5, that would get us rolling tonight, if someone wouldn't mind.
On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, in front of the king's quarters. while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight. And he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter, and the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is it? What is your request?" "It shall be given you, even to half of my kingdom." And Esther said, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther has asked." So the king and Haman went to the feast that Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, "What is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." Then Esther answered, "My wish and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said."
All right. So in a scene that maybe puts us in mind of another similar kind of scene, the king seems to be impressed, we might assume, with her beauty and the fact that she had gotten herself all dolled up, all decked out. And so he is so pleased, so beguiled, so whatever you want to call it, that he makes this promise. Whatever you want, just name it. Up to half my kingdom. Put you in mind of another story in the Bible?
Can't remember the name, but when they cut off John the Baptist's head.
Yep, Herod. Herod and the dancing girl, yeah, his, probably stepdaughter, I guess, comes in and dances. And scholars argue about the dance itself. Some believe that it was a very salacious kind of dance, where basically the young women end up at the end of the dance completely nude, dancing for the king. Oh, certainly that wouldn't happen, would it? Well, I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, King Herod, yeah, whatever you want, name it. The young woman, of course, goes to her mother and says, "Well, what do I want?" And mother advises her, "Oh, ask for John the Baptist's head." I've never understood that. Right? Up to half my kingdom. Name it and it's yours.
Yeah.
My head immediately goes to the calculation, okay, what is half the kingdom? Do I want half the money? Do I want half the land? Do I want half the power? Do I want half the... Right? I'm trying to, how can I maximize my request here? John the Baptist's head is nowhere on my list. But then it's also interesting how human emotions and hate and resentment and thirst for vengeance can come rising up. I heard an interesting discussion today as I was driving. They had some guy who used to be over in Russia before the breakup. And he was talking about how Russians view this whole Ukraine and Belarus and all the 15 nations that were part of the former Soviet Union that were broken off. And he said, they feel robbed. They feel that was taken from them. And they may very well be looking for vengeance. And hey, that was wrong that many years ago. And now we have a chance to make it right. They said they see things totally different than we do. And they said, to a certain extent, Ukraine breaking away, Putin may have taken that very personally. And he may have some personal axe to grind in this whole mess. Well, surely an individual's personal axe to grind would never erupt on the global scene, would it? Yeah, it has happened frequently in history. But here he makes a promise. And surprisingly, what does she ask for? At least at this point?
Have another feast.
Yeah, come back again. We're not told what she was thinking. We're not told why. You can argue. Scholars have talked and written about it. Had she lost her nerve? Had she chickened out? Or did she have some greater plan? Or was this God's hand at work again and we just don't recognize it and it doesn't tell us specifically in the story? It's just another example in the story that we're not really told. We're not given the answers to some of the questions that we may have. But the next couple of things that happened would probably not have happened without this delay and this next feast coming up. So let's read on. The rest of chapter 5, if someone would.
Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's table, or king's gate, and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him, and how he had elevated him above the other nobles and officials. And that's not all, Haman added. I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, and he has invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction, as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, have a gallows built 75 feet high, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go with the king to the dinner and be happy. This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the gallows built.
All right. So remember, Haman is an influential guy right alongside the king. And we certainly read from here how he took the invitation to join the king at this special feast prepared by Esther. And he kind of recounts how, look at, man, I got it going on. Just look at me. Power, money, wealth, influence. But what just set him off? Mordecai. Yeah, who refused to bow down, who refused to pay homage to Haman. And his hatred for Mordecai, and accordingly his hatred for the Jews, had set in motion what is kind of now going on in the background of this story. So his wife and friends give him counsel. Now, scholars will debate, there's no evidence that anyone ever built gallows that were 75 foot high. What's necessary for gallows that are 75 foot high? A lot of steps. And just the thought, so is this to be taken literally? Or is this like us when we say, well, I moved that box, but it weighs a ton? Are we really saying that it weighs a ton? Have we weighed it? And it weighs because really, whenever anyone says that, you should always say, are you talking metric tons or short tons? Because metric tons about 2,200 pounds, where a short ton is 2,000 pounds. So, right? So when you weigh, the point is, right? The point is, it's not how heavy it is. It's the fact that it's really, and these were really, really big. And why would you ever want a really, really big galleys? So that everyone can see. And the message was to be, don't mess with Haman. Right? That was kind of where Haman was leading. So now, step 2 of the puzzle is put into place. Other questions or comments?
I sort of think when you make the comment about the gallows being built there,
Yeah.
they were telling him to do this. So it wasn't really his idea.
Right, yeah.
So they might have been exaggerating.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, yeah, and you know, do leaders have counselors that somehow, you know, what do you often tell people that you're advising? How about what they kind of want to hear, right? I mean, so they offer, well, here's a solution. This is how to take care of Mordecai. This would put him in his spot, make you look grand and great and strong, and put Mordecai in his spot. You wouldn't have to feel bad anymore. Yeah, I mean, sometimes your advisors are not the, it is one of the problems that leaders have. It's one of the problems that celebrities have. They're typically surrounded by people that tell them what they want to hear and not what they need to hear, or they tell them what they think they want them to hear and not the truth. And so you run into that problem. It happens at all levels of life, right? Sometimes people are afraid to tell the boss what he needs to be told. So in that respect, it's not that much different than regular life. But Haman had to think, I got him now. I got him now. So let's go ahead and we'll dive into chapter 6 and maybe the first 11 verses, and then we'll take a pause.
The king honors Mordecai. On that night the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, who had sought to lay hands on King Xerxes. And the king said, what honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? The king's young men who attended him said, nothing has been done for him. And the king said, who is in their court?
And I'm just going to keep your finger there, Gordon. But so the king can't sleep the night before this big feast with Esther. He can't sleep. Fate, luck, bad burrito, or maybe God's hand for him to ask for the book of Chronicles, not the Chronicles of the Bible, but they had other books that recorded things, and he, okay, read for me. And it just so happens that of all the books that they could read, that they open it up, and lo and behold, it's to a section about Mordecai. And wow, how fortuitous. Or we can see God at work. All right, Gordon, continue. Verse 4.
No. And the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of his king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's young men told him, Haman is there, standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? And Haman said to himself, whom would the king delight to honor more than me?
Oh, Haman. Oh, Haman. You maybe should have asked a question before assuming that you know the answer. All right.
And Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be to the man whom the king delights to honor.
And can't you just see Haman as he's laying this all out for the king? You know, he's imagining it in his own mind. There I'm going to be robed, riding the king. Oh, this is going to be so sweet. Go ahead, Gordon.
Then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew. And Haman was deflated. Oh, that's up right there. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned. So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai, and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.
Oh, that had to hurt, didn't it? That had to hurt. All right. Just finish the chapter.
Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house mourning and with his head covered. And Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him.
Writings on the wall.
Wow. So his family and friends, man, how quickly they turn on it. And they see this as being the handwriting on the wall. And you know, Haman, buddy, this is not looking good for you, buddy. So what an incredible turnaround. So earlier, Haman had gone into the king and said, hey, there's this group of people and they're no good. And he didn't tell the king everything, but he got the edict to wipe them out in the future. And then Haman's back there and the king says, what should I do for somebody? This is what you... Well, it's not who he thought. And we're going to see that same kind of thing happen at least one more time in the story. And it's kind of the interesting twists and turns, which is why I think you could almost see them making an interesting kind of movie out of it. Kind of the plot twists and the twists and turns, and the book doesn't ever kind of specifically give God all the credit, so they can make the movie about, well, isn't this interesting, and the human condition and the human psyche is an interesting thing, and they can do it probably without even realizing that there is a story here that involves God. But one can almost see how it would make an interesting story. All right, let's pick it up then, that last verse in chapter 6, and then chapter 7, the first 6 verses there. I'll take my turn. While they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuch arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. So, feast phase 2. So the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther. And on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, what is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, who is he, and where is he who has dared to do this? And Esther said, a foe and enemy, this wicked Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. Now notice, Esther kind of tells the king, look, my life is in danger, and my people, but she never really connects it for the king that, hey, I'm a Jew. Right? So as Haman was kind of vague in explaining things to the king, now in kind of an interesting coincidence, Esther's a little vague here and kind of explains it to the king. Can't, as we talk about this, can't also think of another instances in Scripture where Samuel is talking to King David. And he tells a story about this very, 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 very wealthy man with hundreds of sheep, and this very poor man with but a single lamb, who he takes into his bed, such as his fondness for this sheep. And the rich man comes along and slaughters the poor man's sheep. And then Samuel says, "Oh, great king, what should be done to such a man?" And David says, "Well, he should be severely punished. He should have his life taken from him." And then Samuel says, "You demand." And realize how much guts that would have taken to have told the king that you're wrong. You're in deep trouble. But in this case, she asked. He says, "Who is it? Who is he who dared to do this?" And then Esther says, "Hey, it's Haman." And Haman was shook. Right? rest of the chapter, 7 through the end of the chapter. Someone would?
And the king arose in his wrath from the wine drinking and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. And the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine. As Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was,
Oh, what a bad time for the king to come back in. For some reason or another, Haman, in his pleading, kind of falls on the couch with the queen, and then the king walks back in. It's like, oops, right? Not a good thing. Go ahead.
and the king said, will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house? As the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, moreover, the gallows that Haman had prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high. And the king said, hang him on that. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king abated.
Man, Haman just can't catch a break, can he? All of his evil plans, all of his self-serving plans are now upended, and he ends up hanging there 75 foot in the air or whatever it was.
The wine probably helped.
And you know, there are a couple of ancient historians, I think they're Greek historians, from about the time of Xerxes or after, who tell us a little bit about Xerxes and what kind of a fella he was. And apparently he was given to fits of rage, and it didn't take much to set him off.
Oh, I would say it.
And when that happens, this is exactly the kind of behavior that you would have expected. So yeah, not really surprising. Yeah, it would have.
How many men would really go for another man on his wife?
Yes, especially after your wife, very pretty wife, very popular queen, had just told you that that's the guy who's trying to kill her. It didn't look good for Haman, and Haman knew that. You know, all the way back in verse 6, you know, Haman was terrified. I mean, Haman had to know. It's like, oh crap. And you even wonder about Haman, right? Oh, give him the king's horse, give him the king's robe, parade him around town, and then he has to do it for Mordecai. And then his wife and family say, look, buddy, it ain't going your way. And now this happens, and he goes, well, okay, I'm not happy, I'm grumpy, but at least I get to go to the feast with the queen and the king again, so at least I'm not totally shot. And one can only imagine, you know, the expectation is that nobody really probably appreciated the fact that Esther was a Jew. Certainly there's no indication that Haman knew. You know, the relationship between Mordecai and Esther is a secret one. And so, you know, had Haman known that she was a Jew, would he have handled things a little differently? But man, things didn't end well for old Haman. And now,
Yeah,
that, remember the pur? This was how he cast lots, and so it put the day for the killing the Jews so far in the future, which really proved to be very fortuitous, a helpful thing in the story. But later we will read how Esther and the king and Mordecai established a new feast or festival for the ancient Jews, one that is not mentioned in the Bible anywhere, and that is the Feast of Purim, which generally happens in February in our calendar. And it's a 2-day celebration that the Jews do. It wasn't one of the feasts prescribed by God. And this feast, it's kind of interesting, was enacted by civil leaders, not priests, not prophets, but Esther and Mordecai. But a feature part of that celebration is, for the Jews that celebrate that, is to read from the book of Esther. And it's kind of like, you guys know what a melodrama is? Like those hokey old silent pictures where you have the guy with the handlebar mustache and he's evil, and whenever his name is mentioned, a lot of times there's booing and hissing and stuff like that. And then when the hero, arrives, there's clapping and shouting. Well, as they read the book of Esther, the little Jewish kids and the people listening, whenever they hear the name Haman, they hiss and boo, and they have these rattles and these shakers that make a lot of noise, and it's all kind of queued up around Haman, the villain, this bad guy in the story, and how he is undone by fate, by luck, or maybe by the hand of God providing for his people, so that the promised Messiah could still come from the Jews. So it's kind of an interesting thing.
So do they still celebrate that?
Yeah, some do.
Or
Some do. It depends on kind of your branch of Judaism.
Jews you are.
And my understanding is, and boy, I don't have a lot of confidence in this, it's just based on what little I read about it, is that even the Jews can't quite agree if this is a legitimate festival or not. Since it wasn't instituted by God or by a prophet or a priest, there are some that are kind of wary. Others of them say, look, it shows the hand of God at work taking care of his people, and therefore it is something fitting to be remembered. And so I don't think it's universally celebrated, and some would not put it on par with some of the other. I know one of the commentaries I read said it's for the Jews that celebrate it, it's kind of a combination of Halloween and Christmas. So there's costumes, there's presents, there's there's kind of a celebration, because they're celebrating the deliverance, right? This is a type of deliverance. God delivered them from the hands of evil Haman. And so it is a celebratory thing. And it's all kind of connected to him casting lots to find out when the Jews were going to be destroyed. Would it have been different if the lots had fallen to the first month, the first day? Right? Let's do it right away. Let's go kill him. But this way it gave him time. It gave him 10, 12 months before all this happened. And that's in the background of chapter 8 as we pick things up there. So if someone wouldn't mind reading probably maybe the first 8 verses of chapter 8.
That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Esther again pleaded with the king. Falling at his feet and weeping, she begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman, the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and thinks it is the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman sent Hammedatha and Agagite devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have hanged him on the gallows. Now write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews, as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked.
You see, that's the problem they're wrestling with here. It's kind of the law of the Medes and the Persians. Once it's done, it's done. You can't just revoke it. You can't just cancel it. Seems maybe crazy to our way, but in their ancient world, once that was written, it could not be undone. And so their challenge is, okay, what do we do to effectively counteract what had been done by Haman with the earlier edict? And that's what we're going to read about in the rest of chapter 8. If someone wants to pick up in verse 9.
At once the royal secretaries were summoned. On the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan, they wrote out all Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the satraps, governors, and nobles of the 127 provinces, stretching from India to Cush.
So from Asia all the way to North Africa.
These orders were written in the script of each province and the language of each people, and also to the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes, sealed the dispatches with the king's signet ring, and sent them by mounted couriers who rode fast horses, especially bred for the king. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force of any nationality or province that might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. The day appointed for the Jews to do this in all the provinces of the king Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers, riding the royal horses, raced out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was also issued in the citadel of Susa.
All right, can you catch what happened? They couldn't undo it, so they issued another edict that either effectively nullified it, or at least took the edge off it, or maybe swung the balance of power in the other direction. So what they basically says is, on the day when, according to Haman's edict, anyone could just kill a Jew and keep all their stuff, right? That was how he was going to eliminate them all. Now there's an edict that said, hey Jews, you guys can prepare to defend yourself. And anyone who would do you harm, you can kill. You can annihilate. You are officially sanctioned by the government to do it. And anybody who wants to help the Jews do that, go ahead. A pretty clever approach. As I was reading this morning, I couldn't help but think, wow, I mean, we would never do it, and I'm not proposing that this be done, okay? But, with all the anti-Semitic talk and groups that are out there, if the government said, okay, Jews, next Thursday, you can go kill any of them you want. If they're hostile to you, go wipe them out. Go annihilate them. Would that change anything? Holy crap, I'm not sure what would happen. That sounds like a potentially very dangerous situation. And again, I'm not advocating for it, but that's essentially what this edict does. It legitimizes and it makes it possible for the Jews to rise up and rally support and even ask others for help. And just think about how this plays out, right? So you got the Jew haters, the skinheads. Hey, finally we gotta get rid of those Jews, all right! Yeah, where'd this idea come from? Haman? What's he doing?
He's
Just
dead.
hanging around the castle. And now all of a sudden people can resist us. Where's this coming from? Mordecai and the king. What's Mordecai doing? Living in the castle. He's the king's right-hand man right now. He's one of the Jews that we were supposed to wipe out. Are you going to be lining up to go kill Mordecai? Or to go kill Queen Esther? I don't think so. And so effectively, they turned the table without revoking the earlier edict. Now we're going to read about the results of this edict. But that's kind of how they countered. And the fact that this was all happening in the future gave them time. And we're going to read where many of even the non-Jews kind of rallied around the Jews and said, well, gosh, we'll support you. And you can imagine how if you ever give people green light to kill one another, weird alliances suddenly come up. And yeah, I may not like you Jews, but I really dislike some of Haman's people. And, there's a lot of people who hate the Jews for no good reason. It'd be nice to get rid of them. And here's our chance, right? Anyone that's opposed to or hostile toward the Jews, this is a chance. It's not so much how to deal with the problem or how to make bigotry go away. This isn't the prescriptive answer for that. But this is how they came up, was to nullify Haman's earlier edict that anyone could kill the Jews and keep their stuff if they wanted it. What's that show that's on TV? I've never watched it, so I have nothing about it. But what's it called? Purge?
Yeah, they've got a couple movies like that.
Yeah, like one night a year,
You're allowed to kill anybody.
you can kill whoever you want. And the thought is you'll get rid of the undesirables and the bad people and all that kind of stuff. So the stage has been set to undo Haman's. Let's read the rest of the chapter then. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple, and the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, wherever the king's command and his edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews, for the fear of the Jews had fallen on them.
I would want to go with the people that
Yeah,
really get killed.
yeah. I mean, let's see. I think, I'm a Jew too. Yeah, I'm with them. Yeah, I'm with them.
What were they considered? I mean, they weren't Jewish, so what were they?
What were
Their nationality or whatever they were
the
considered?
Persians?
They were just.
I mean, remember, we're in Babylon, and so the king and the bulk of the population, they're Persians.
But weren't the Jews Persians too?
No.
No.
The Jews would have been considered, God's remnant. The Jews living in Persia, in Babylon, or in Susa in this case. So there were Jews, and I suppose they had the same problem back then that they do today. Who's a Jew and who's not a Jew? I mean, that's really a problem today. When people say, well, Pastor, what do Jews believe? Well, Orthodox Jews or liberal Jews, practicing Jews, ethnic Jews, religious Jews, and, who's, how
I
do
don't know if
you...
Whoopi Goldberg knows.
What's that?
Whoopi Goldberg knows.
Yeah.
She knows
Yeah,
that.
so there's always kind of an issue there a little bit, but they would have all been from the ancient Middle East, so they all would have looked, skin color and things like that would have been fine.
But isn't that the problem of today too? Are they a race or a religion? Well, they're both.
Yes,
And she misstated and said, no, they're not a race. Well, yes, they are. They're a race and a religion.
yes.
Black
Or-
person
or-
can be a Jew, but.
Or they are an ethnicity.
Right, ethnicity.
Yeah, because I think if you start talking race, some would say, well, they're Palestinian, or are they Israeli? Are they Syrian? Or are they Jordanese? That's a nationality, but then you have ethnic, you hear of ethnic cleansing way more than we should, and it happens all over the globe at different times. But yeah, and then, one wonders how many of these Jews just kind of drifted away from the church. I mean, what makes a true Jew? What makes one of God's people? Their faith. And it was the same in the ancient world. Now the Jews, they got hung up on ethnicity. If we can trace our lineage back to Abraham, then you're in and you're one of God's people. And they missed the boat. They totally missed the boat. And so the New Testament reminds us that you are children of Abraham by faith. It's not about ethnicity. And we still make the same, mistake today. That type of people. They're Christian. Are they? I mean, are they? What they believe, what they teach, what they confess, are they really Christian? Or do they claim that name? It's like some of these, were they really Jews? And you can bet leading up to this, there were all kinds of people saying, I'm not Jew. I'm not a Jew. I have a funny name, but that was on my mom's side, twice removed, but no, I'm not a Jew. Well, now with this new edict, you can all of a sudden say, I'm a Jew. Yeah, I'm a Jew. I can kill whoever I want. If you're angry at me, if you hate me, I can kill you now, because so you would get a lot of that stuff going on as well.
You know, I watched the Olympics a lot this.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of individuals, there was an American girl that changed the citizenship of China so she could perform for
The snowboarder, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
She won the
but
gold
there was
medal.
also the other way around where
Yep.
people changed to be American or whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
they,
Yeah. It would be confusing, and especially for the Jews living in Persia, it's been 100 years since our ancestors were carried off. Well, are they Jewish? Are they, they're Middle Eastern. Well, okay, that's, Persia went from India all the way over to Africa. I mean, that was a wide swath. It was quite an empire. And the Jews, or at least God's Old Testament people, that remnant was a pretty small group. But would have been great confusion, I'm sure. All right, chapter 9 then. We read of the destruction that does ensue. If someone wouldn't mind maybe taking the first 10 verses.
The Jews destroy their enemies. Now in the 12th month, which is the months of Adar, the 13th day. That's February 13th, right?
well, on mine it says March 7th.
Yeah, it's in the spring. They're on the lunar calendar.
Yeah, but 10 is December, is the 10th month, second, our 12th, and 11th.
Well, depending on the lunar, we get out of whack some years. That's like Easter is
Okay.
sometime in April, sometime in March, but it's always a Passover. So, yeah.
Okay. The Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's command and edict were about to be carried out, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them. The reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could stand against them, for the fear of them had fallen on all peoples. All the officials of the provinces and the satraps and the governors and the royal agents also helped the Jews, for the fear of Mordecai had fallen on them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. For the man Mordecai grew more and more powerful. The Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, as did and did as they pleased to those who hated them. In Susa, the citadel itself, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men, and also killed Harshandatha and
Oh, yeah.
Dal,
Here you have the 10 sons of Haman listed, so.
and Espatha, and Horatha, and Adalia, and Aridapha, and Paramashta, and Erisai, and Eridai, and Baisatha. 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, but they laid no hand on the plunder.
So the killing stopped, and while the edict allowed for them to kill men, women, and children, in chapter 9 we hear of them killing the men. And we also hear that they didn't plunder them at all. They didn't take any of their stuff. And you almost get the impression they didn't want anybody to say, oh, they just did that to take their stuff. I mean, they weren't just protecting themselves, they weren't just defending themselves against those who hated them. They were actually just, seeking to enrich themselves off the gains of others. So you see maybe a little restraint here, but certainly you rise up, and you get a sense, if you didn't have it before, even the officials, the government officials, were on the side of the Jews. Again, because of Mordecai. And they had a fear of Mordecai and crossing him. And one kind of wonders, is that just good luck? Is it fate? Or is this the hand of God in stirring up the people to help the Jews and to not turn against them? And in so doing, once again, God at work preserving his people. Gordon, do you mind taking a few more verses?
Sure. That very day, the number of those killed in Susa, the citadel, was reported to the king. And the king said to Queen Esther, in Susa, the citadel, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men, and also the 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what further is your request? It shall be fulfilled. And Esther said, if it please the king, let the Jews who are in Susa be allowed tomorrow also to do according to this day's edict, and let the 10 sons of Haman be hanged on the gallows. So the king commanded this to be done. The decree was issued in Susa, and the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. The Jews who were in Susa gathered also on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they killed 300 men in Susa, but they laid no hands on the plunder.
Now at the end of verse 10, we're told that they killed the 10 sons of Haman. And then here, the next day, we're told they hung him on the gallows. Well, the word that gets translated gallows can also literally be translated as poles. And it wasn't uncommon in the ancient world to hang dead bodies on poles up high so people could see and to make an example of them. So it may be very well that that's what they did with the sons of Haman. His sons ended up kind of where he did, hanging up there for all the world to see. But Esther asked for one more day to kind of continue the edict of the previous day. Verse 16.
Now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also gathered to defend their lives, and got relief from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of those who hated them. But they laid no hands on the plunder. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested and made that day a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were in Susa gathered on the 13th day and on the 14th, and rested on the 15th day, making that a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages who live in the rural towns held the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day for gladness and feasting, and as a holiday, and as a day on which they send gifts of food to one another.
And so the beginning of the celebration of what becomes known as Purim in the Jewish people. 75,000, that's a big number.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of people being killed. But remember, this is spread over an area from roughly India and southern Asia all the way to the north coast of Africa. This was a huge area. So it's not like you had 75,000 slaughtered in one place. As a matter of fact, in the